The gunshot echoed through the mountain pass, just as the first snowflakes began to fall, and Georgia Grace knew she had seconds before the men caught up to her stolen horse. She urged the mare forward through the narrow canyon trail, her breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to white clouds in the freezing December air. Behind her, 3 riders were gaining ground, their shouts carrying on the wind that whipped through the rocks of the northern Nevada wilderness. The year was 1883, and Georgia had made the worst mistake of her life 2 days ago, when she had witnessed something she was never meant to see. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that clung to her dark hair and the threadbare coat she wore. Her fingers were numb on the reins, and she could feel the horse flagging beneath her. They had been running for hours, ever since she had fled Winnemucca in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need to survive. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The bullet pinged off a rock to her left, sending chips of stone flying. Georgia's heart hammered against her ribs as she rounded a bend in the trail, hoping for somewhere to hide, somewhere to make a stand, anywhere that might offer even a moment's respite. Instead, the trail opened into a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches heavy with accumulating snow. She pulled the horse to a stop, her chest heaving. There was nowhere else to go. The trail ended here in this clearing, the path ahead blocked by a steep rock face too treacherous to climb, especially in the growing storm. She slid from the saddle, her legs nearly giving out beneath her, and turned to face the direction from which she had come. The 3 riders emerged from the trail like dark specters in the white curtain of snow. She recognized them immediately. Bull Henderson and his 2 nephews, all of them members of the gang that ran the illegal gambling operation in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon. She had been working there as a serving girl, trying to earn enough money to buy passage to San Francisco, where her sister lived. Instead, she had accidentally walked in on them counting stolen money from the bank robbery in Lovelock, and they had made it clear that the only way to keep such a secret was to be buried with it. "End of the line, girl," Bull called out as he dismounted. He was a big man with a thick gray beard and cold eyes that held no mercy. His nephews, Frank and Charlie, flanked him on either side, their hands resting on their gun belts. Georgia's throat was dry. She had no weapon, no way to defend herself. The snow fell on her upturned face as she looked at the 3 men who meant to kill her. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I will not say anything. I will leave Nevada and never come back. You will never hear from me again." "Cannot take that chance," Bull said, shaking his head. "You saw too much. Please," Georgia said again, louder this time. Her knees buckled and she sank into the snow, her hands clasped together. Tears streamed down her cheeks, freezing in the bitter cold. "I am only 19 years old. I have a family who needs me. Please, I am begging you, have mercy." Bull drew his revolver and cocked the hammer. "Got nothing personal against you, girl, just business. Then you might want to reconsider that business." The voice came from behind Georgia, deep and steady, cutting through the howl of the wind. She twisted around to see a man on horseback emerging from the tree line at the far edge of the clearing. He sat tall in the saddle, a dark figure against the white snow, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the storm. Even from a distance, she could see the rifle resting across his saddle horn, pointed in the general direction of Bull and his men. "This does not concern you, stranger," Bull called out. "Keep riding." The man guided his horse forward until he was beside Georgia, positioning himself between her and the 3 gunmen. "Seems to me it concerns me just fine if I am witnessing a murder about to take place," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was an undercurrent of steel in it. "She is a witness to a crime," Frank said, his hand hovering near his gun. "We are just tidying up loose ends." "Funny thing about loose ends," the stranger said. "Sometimes when you pull on them, the whole thing unravels. You boys really want to add another killing to your list, especially with a witness." He tilted his head slightly toward Georgia. Bull's eyes narrowed. "You offering to be that witness?" "I am offering you a choice," the stranger said. "You can ride away right now and forget about this girl, or you can try your luck against me. Either way, she is not dying today." The clearing fell silent except for the whisper of falling snow. Georgia could barely breathe as she watched the standoff unfold. She had no idea who this man was or why he had chosen to intervene, but she found herself praying harder than she ever had in her life that Bull Henderson would back down. "3 against 1, Charlie said, speaking for the first time. "Odds are not in your favor, mister." "Maybe not," the stranger agreed. "But I guarantee at least 2 of you will be dead before you clear leather, and I am betting none of you want to find out which 2. He shifted the rifle slightly, and Georgia saw his finger resting on the trigger. "Your choice, gentlemen. Make it quick." "This storm is getting worse." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Bull spat into the snow and holstered his revolver. "This is not over," he said, glaring at the stranger. "I find out who you are, and there will be hell to pay." "I will be easy to find," the stranger said. "Gideon Ortiz. I run cattle on the 00 Ranch about 15 miles south of Winnemucca. You want to continue this conversation, you know where to find me. But you come looking. You better bring more than 3 guns." Bull's face reddened with anger, but he jerked his head toward his nephews and swung back into his saddle. "You are protecting a thief and a witness to crimes," he said. "The law will hear about this." "The law might be interested to hear about a lot of things," Gideon replied. "Like where the money from that Lovelock Bank job ended up. Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you leave." The 3 men wheeled their horses around and disappeared back down the trail, their curses fading into the storm. Georgia remained on her knees in the snow, shaking uncontrollably, unable to process what had just happened. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. Gideon dismounted and crouched beside her, setting his rifle aside. "You are safe now," he said gently. "Can you stand?" Georgia tried to nod, but her body would not cooperate. The fear and exhaustion and cold had all caught up to her at once, and she found herself unable to do anything but shake. Gideon removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of wood smoke and leather. "My name is Gideon," he said. "What is yours, Georgia?" she managed through chattering teeth. "Georgia Grace." "Well, Miss Grace, we need to get you out of this storm before you freeze to death. Can I help you onto your horse?" She shook her head. "She is exhausted. I rode her too hard trying to escape." Gideon glanced at the mare, who stood with her head down, sides heaving. "She needs rest and warmth as much as you do," he agreed. "We are not far from my ranch. Can you ride with me? I will lead your horse." Georgia nodded, not trusting her voice. Gideon helped her to her feet, his grip firm and steady. He was taller than she had realized, with broad shoulders and a strong build. She caught a glimpse of his face beneath his hat. Dark eyes, sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. He looked to be in his mid-20s, and there was something in his expression that made her feel safer than she had felt in days. He lifted her onto his horse as easily as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she found herself leaning back against his solid chest, too tired and cold to care about propriety. He gathered the reins of her mare and clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward into the storm. The ride to the ranch passed in a blur of white and cold. Georgia drifted in and out of awareness, conscious only of the warmth of Gideon's body against her back and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. She thought she might have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing she knew, they were in a barn and Gideon was lifting her down from the saddle. "Stay here while I tend the horses," he said, settling her on a bale of hay. "I will be quick." True to his word, he worked efficiently, unsaddling both horses and rubbing them down with handfuls of straw. He gave them grain and fresh water, checking Georgia's mare carefully for any signs of injury. The barn was warmer than outside, protected from the wind, but Georgia still shivered violently beneath his coat. When he finished with the horses, Gideon came back to her and helped her stand. "The house is just across the yard," he said. "Can you make it?" "I think so," Georgia said, though her legs felt like jelly. He kept his arm around her waist as they crossed the short distance to the ranch house, half carrying her up the steps and through the front door. The warmth inside hit her like a physical force, and she gasped. "Easy," Gideon said. "You are half frozen. Warming up too fast can be dangerous." He guided her to a chair near the fireplace, which already held a low fire. He added wood and stoked it until flames leaped up, casting dancing shadows around the room. Georgia looked around as sensation began to return to her fingers and toes, bringing with it painful tingles. The house was simple but well kept, with rough-hewn wooden walls and sturdy furniture. A small kitchen occupied one corner, and she could see two doors that likely led to bedrooms. Everything was clean and organized, which surprised her. She had expected a bachelor rancher's home to be more chaotic. "Let me get you something hot to drink," Gideon said. He moved to the kitchen and began working the hand pump at the sink, filling a kettle with water. He set it on the cast iron stove and added wood to that fire as well. "Why did you help me?" Georgia asked suddenly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rough from screaming and crying. Gideon turned to look at her. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And because no one deserves to be hunted down like an animal, especially not for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time." "You do not know anything about me," Georgia pointed out. "I could be exactly what they said, a thief and a criminal. Are you?" "No," she said firmly. "I worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon as a serving girl. I was bringing drinks to the back room and walked in on Bull Henderson and his men counting money. They said it was from the bank robbery in Lovelock last month. I tried to leave, tried to pretend I had not seen anything, but Bull grabbed me. He said I knew too much and that they could not let me live. I managed to break away and run. I stole a horse from the livery and just rode. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away." Gideon nodded slowly. "That sounds about right for Bull Henderson. He is mean as a snake and twice as poisonous. Him and his whole gang have been causing trouble in Winnemucca for months now, but the sheriff is either too scared or too bought off to do anything about it." "So, why did you stand up to them?" Georgia asked. "Are you not afraid they will come after you?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of Gideon's mouth. "I am not easy to intimidate," he said, "and I have dealt with worse than Bull Henderson. Besides, sometimes a man has to take a stand for what is right, consequences be damned." The kettle began to whistle, and Gideon turned his attention to making coffee. He brought her a steaming cup a few minutes later, the rich aroma filling her nostrils. Georgia wrapped her hands around the warm cup and took a careful sip. It was strong and black and exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for saving my life. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Gideon said. He pulled up another chair and sat down across from her. "I could not stand by and watch an innocent person get killed. It would not be right." They sat in silence for a while. the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Georgia studied Gideon over the rim of her cup, trying to understand this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her. He had a strong face, handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for a living. "How did you happen to be out there in the storm?" she asked finally. "I was checking on my cattle," Gideon said. "I have a line shack in the mountains where I keep some of the herd during the winter months. I was heading back when I heard the gunshots. I followed the sound and found you." "So you just happened to be in the right place at the right time," Georgia said softly. "Or you were just lucky," Gideon replied. "Either way, you are safe now. Those men will not bother you here." "But what am I supposed to do?" Georgia asked, feeling panic begin to rise in her chest. "I cannot stay here forever. I cannot go back to Winnemucca." "Where am I supposed to go?" "One problem at a time," Gideon said calmly. "First, you need to rest and recover. Then we will figure out what comes next. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need." Georgia shook her head. "I cannot impose on you like that. You have already done so much." "It is not an imposition," Gideon said. "I have a spare bedroom that does not get used. You will be safe here and you will have time to decide what you want to do. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I could use the company. It gets lonely out here during the winter." Georgia wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted and too grateful to protest further. "Just for a few days," she said, "until I figure out my next move." "That is settled then," Gideon said. He stood and walked to one of the doors, opening it to reveal a small but clean bedroom with a quilt-covered bed. "You can sleep here. I will get you some extra blankets. It can get cold at night." He brought her an armful of blankets and a clean nightshirt that was far too big for her but warm and soft. "Bathroom is out back," he said. "But there is a chamber pot under the bed if you need it during the night. I will be in the other room if you need anything. Just call out." Georgia nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Gideon gave her a reassuring smile and closed the door, leaving her alone. She changed into the nightshirt with shaking hands, her wet clothes falling in a heap on the floor. She climbed into the bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin, and within seconds, she was asleep. She woke late the next morning to the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then the memories came flooding back. The chase, the snow, Gideon's intervention. She was safe, at least for now. Georgia got up and found her clothes hanging by the fire, dry and warm. Someone, Gideon presumably, must have come in during the night and taken care of them. She dressed quickly and emerged from the bedroom to find Gideon at the stove cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "I hope you are hungry. I made plenty." "I am starving," Georgia admitted. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. Gideon served up plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits with gravy. They ate at the small table, and Georgia had to force herself not to wolf down the food like a starving animal. It was delicious, better than anything she had eaten in months. "You are a good cook," she said between bites. "I have had a lot of practice," Gideon replied. "When you live alone, you either learn to cook or you starve. I prefer the former." "Have you always lived alone?" Georgia asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I am sorry, that is none of my business." "It is all right," Gideon said. "I do not mind. And yes, I have lived alone since I bought this ranch 3 years ago. Before that, I worked as a ranch hand on various spreads across Nevada and California. I saved up enough money to buy my own place, and here I am." "Do you have family?" Georgia asked. "My mother lives in Sacramento," Gideon said. "My father died when I was 15. I have two younger sisters who are both married and living in San Francisco. I try to visit when I can, but the ranch keeps me pretty busy. What about you?" "I have an older sister in San Francisco," Georgia said. "Martha. She is married to a merchant. They have two children. I was trying to save enough money to join her there. That is why I was working at the saloon. The pay was not great, but it was the best I could find in Winnemucca." "What about your parents?" Georgia's expression darkened. "My father died 5 years ago in a mining accident in Virginia City. My mother died 2 years later from pneumonia. It was just Martha and me after that, but she got married and moved to San Francisco. I stayed behind because I thought I could make a go of it on my own." She laughed bitterly. "That worked out well." "You are not responsible for what happened," Gideon said gently. "You were just trying to survive." "I should have been more careful," Georgia said. "I should have knocked before I entered that room. If I had just been more aware of my surroundings, none of this would have happened. And if Bull Henderson was not a murdering thief, none of this would have happened either," Gideon countered. "You cannot blame yourself for someone else's crimes." They finished breakfast in silence, and afterward, Georgia insisted on helping with the dishes. Gideon showed her around the ranch, introducing her to the layout of the property. The storm from the previous day had passed, leaving behind several inches of fresh snow that sparkled in the bright morning sunlight. The ranch was beautiful in a stark, wild way, with the mountains rising up in the distance and the valley stretching out below. "I have about 200 head of cattle," Gideon explained as they walked. "I run them on open range during the summer and bring them down to the valley during winter. It is a decent living, nothing fancy, but it is mine. I do not owe anyone anything." Georgia could hear the pride in his voice, and she understood it. In a time and place where so many people were dependent on others for their survival, Gideon had carved out his own space in the world. She envied that independence even as she wondered if she would ever have it for herself. Over the next few days, they fell into an easy routine. Gideon would rise early to tend to the cattle and handle the various chores around the ranch. Georgia helped where she could, cooking meals and keeping the house clean. She found that she enjoyed the work, enjoyed the sense of purpose it gave her. And she enjoyed Gideon's company. He was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that often caught her off guard and made her laugh. He told her stories about his time as a ranch hand, about the characters he had met and the adventures he had experienced. In turn, she told him about growing up in Virginia City, about her father's dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines, and how those dreams had died along with him. One evening, about a week after her arrival, they were sitting by the fire after dinner when Gideon brought up the subject she had been avoiding. "You need to decide what you want to do," he said carefully. "I am happy to have you stay here as long as you like, but I know you cannot hide forever. You have a sister in San Francisco. Have you thought about trying to reach her?" Georgia had thought about little else, but every plan she came up with seemed impossible. "I do not have the money for passage," she said. "Everything I owned was in my room above the saloon, and I could not go back for it. I do not even have proper traveling clothes." "I could loan you the money," Gideon offered. Georgia shook her head firmly. "You have already done too much for me. I cannot ask you to do more." "You are not asking. I am offering." "Why?" Georgia demanded, frustration creeping into her voice. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Why are you going out of your way to help a stranger?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "About 5 years ago, I was working on a ranch in California. There was a woman there, a cook's daughter named Alina. She was young and pretty and full of life. We became friends, and I thought maybe it could be something more. But the foreman had his eye on her too, and he was not the kind of man who took no for an answer. One night, he tried to force himself on her. She fought back and got away, but he was furious. He told everyone she was a thief, said she had stolen money from the bunkhouse. It was a lie, but no one would believe her word over his. They ran her off the ranch, and I never saw her again. He turned to look at Georgia, and she could see the pain in his eyes. I did not stand up for her. I knew she was innocent, but I was young and scared of losing my job, so I kept my mouth shut. I have regretted that decision every day since. When I saw you in that clearing, begging for your life, I knew I had a chance to do what I should have done back then. I could not let another innocent person suffer because of my cowardice. Georgia felt tears prick her eyes. You were not a coward, she said. You were young and in a difficult position. That is no excuse, Gideon said. A man should stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. I failed to do that once. I will not fail again. Georgia reached across the space between them and took his hand. You saved my life, she said quietly. That is all that matters. Gideon squeezed her hand gently, and for a moment they simply sat there, connected by that touch. Georgia felt something shift inside her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She had been so focused on survival that she had not allowed herself to truly see Gideon, to recognize him as anything more than her rescuer. But now, looking at him in the firelight, she saw him clearly. A good man, a kind man, a man who had risked his life for a stranger and asked nothing in return. I do not want to go to San Francisco, she said suddenly, surprising herself. Gideon looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? I mean I do not want to leave, Georgia said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I like it here. I like the work and the quiet and the way the mountains look in the morning. I like cooking and cleaning and feeling useful, and I like spending time with you. She felt her face flush with embarrassment, but she pushed on. I know I have only been here a week, and I know you probably want your life back to normal, but I was wondering if maybe you needed help around the ranch. I could earn my keep. I am a hard worker and I learn fast. You would not have to pay me much, just room and board and maybe a little extra so I can save up. Gideon stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Georgia's heart sank. She had overstepped. She had made a fool of herself. Of course he did not want her staying here permanently. He had offered her temporary shelter, not a permanent home. I am sorry, she said quickly. That was presumptuous of me. You have already done so much. I should not have asked for more. Georgia, Gideon said, and something in his tone made her look up. I would like nothing more than for you to stay, but I need you to understand what you would be getting into. This is a hard life. The winters are brutal and the work never stops. There are no neighbors for miles, no town close by for shopping or socializing. It can be lonely and isolating. And if Bull Henderson finds out you are here, there could be trouble. I do not want you to make this decision lightly. I am not, Georgia said firmly. I know what I am asking for, and I know it will not be easy. But I would rather face hardship here, in a place where I feel safe and valued, than live in comfort somewhere I do not belong. If you will have me, I would like to stay. A slow smile spread across Gideon's face, transforming his features. Then stay, he said. Stay as long as you like. I would be honored to have you here. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Georgia's life. She threw herself into the work of the ranch, learning everything Gideon would teach her. She learned how to milk the cow, how to feed the chickens, how to mend fences and chop wood. She learned how to ride properly, spending hours in the saddle as Gideon showed her the boundaries of his property. In return, she transformed the house into a real home. She sewed curtains for the windows using fabric Gideon brought back from a trip to Winnemucca. She planted an herb garden in pots on the windowsill, knowing they would need fresh herbs come spring. She experimented with new recipes, and Gideon ate everything she made with enthusiasm, even when her experiments did not turn out quite right. They talked for hours every evening, sharing their hopes and dreams and fears. Georgia learned that Gideon wanted to expand his ranch, to build it into something that could support a family someday. He wanted to breed better cattle, to improve his herd and his profits. He dreamed of traveling, of seeing places beyond Nevada and California. Georgia shared her own dreams, smaller and more modest. She wanted stability and safety. She wanted a place to belong. She wanted to matter to someone. And as the days turned to weeks, she realized with growing clarity that she wanted those things with Gideon. She did not know when her feelings had shifted from gratitude to something deeper. Maybe it was the way he smiled at her over breakfast, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Maybe it was the way he patiently taught her to ride, his hands steady on the reins as he led her horse through the snow. Maybe it was the sound of his laughter, rich and genuine, when she told him a funny story from her childhood. Or maybe it was simply the accumulation of 100 small kindnesses, each one building on the last until they formed something solid and real. She was falling in love with him, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. Winter deepened, and Christmas approached. Georgia had never been one for elaborate celebrations, but she found herself wanting to make the day special. She baked cookies and bread, filling the house with warm, sweet smells. She convinced Gideon to cut down a small pine tree, and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments she made from old newspapers. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire, drinking hot cider and watching the snow fall outside the window. Georgia had never felt more content, more at peace than she did in that moment. "I have something for you," Gideon said suddenly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Georgia took it with surprise. "You did not have to get me anything." "I wanted to," Gideon said. "Open it." Inside the package was a beautiful silver locket on a delicate chain. Georgia gasped when she saw it. "Gideon, this is too much." "Open the locket," he said softly. She did, and inside was a tiny photograph. It took her a moment to recognize it, but then she realized it was a picture of the ranch house taken from the hill above the property. "How did you get this?" she asked. "I rode into Winnemucca last week and had it made," Gideon said. "I wanted you to have something to remember this place by, something to remind you that you always have a home here, no matter what happens." Tears spilled down Georgia's cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is the most beautiful gift I have ever received." "Let me put it on you," Gideon said. He took the locket and moved behind her, his fingers gentle as he fastened the clasp at the back of her neck. When he finished, he did not move away. Instead, his hands rested lightly on her shoulders. Georgia turned to face him, and suddenly they were very close, their faces just inches apart. She could see the rapid pulse at his throat, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His dark eyes were locked on hers, and she saw in them the same longing she felt. "Georgia," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something." "What?" she whispered. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since that day in the clearing when you were begging for mercy, and you looked at me with those beautiful eyes. I know I have no right to feel this way. I know you came here looking for safety, not romance. But I cannot keep this inside anymore. I love you and I want you to stay, not as my employee or my guest, but as my wife, if you will have me." Georgia's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Yes," she said, the word coming out in a rush. "Yes, I will have you. I love you too, Gideon. I think I have loved you from the moment you offered me grace instead of turning away." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Georgia melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "Marry me," Gideon said. "Marry me and make this ranch our home. We will build a life together, a good life. I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Georgia said, laughing through her tears. "And yes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future together. They would get married in the spring, Gideon decided, once the worst of the winter had passed and they could travel to Winnemucca for a proper ceremony. They talked about expanding the ranch house, adding rooms for the children they both hoped to have someday. They talked about sending for Georgia's sister, inviting her and her family to visit once the weather improved. That night, Georgia went to bed with a light heart and the silver locket around her neck. She touched it gently, feeling the cool metal against her skin, and thought about how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had gone from running for her life to finding a home and a love she had never thought possible. The winter months passed in a blur of happiness. Gideon and Georgia worked side by side, tending the ranch and preparing for spring. They grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's habits and quirks, building the foundation of a strong marriage. Gideon taught Georgia to shoot, insisting that she needed to be able to protect herself if trouble ever came calling. Georgia proved to be a natural marksman, and Gideon teased her that she was a better shot than he was. In late January, Gideon made a trip into Winnemucca to pick up supplies and check on the situation with Bull Henderson. He came back with troubling news. "Henderson and his gang were arrested last week," he told Georgia over dinner. "The U.S. Marshal came through and rounded them all up. Turns out they were wanted for more than just the Lovelock robbery. They had warrants out in 3 different states." Georgia felt relief wash over her. "So I am truly safe now. They cannot come after me." "They will be in prison for a long time," Gideon confirmed. "And even if they somehow got out, they would have bigger problems than you. The marshal knows all about what happened, and he made it clear that anyone who threatens you will answer to him." It was as if a weight had been lifted from Georgia's shoulders. She had been carrying the fear of Bull Henderson with her all these months, even here in the safety of the ranch. To know that threat was truly gone felt like a gift. "There is something else," Gideon said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle of papers. "I talked to the lawyer in town about your situation. He said that because you were a witness to the robbery, and because you helped bring the gang to justice, even indirectly, you might be entitled to part of the reward money. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to buy some cattle of your own or to put toward expanding the house or whatever you want to do with it." Georgia stared at the papers in shock. "I do not understand. I did not do anything to help catch them." "You survived," Gideon said gently. "And your testimony, if it had been needed, would have been crucial to the case. The marshal wanted to make sure you knew that your courage did not go unrecognized." Georgia took the papers with shaking hands. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. "I want to use it for the ranch," she said. "For our future, we can buy breeding stock, improve the herd like you have always wanted." Gideon pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "We will build something amazing together," he said. "I promise you that." As winter gave way to early spring, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. Georgia sewed her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk that Gideon had purchased on another trip to town. She embroidered wildflowers along the hem and sleeves, tiny stitches that took hours of patient work. Gideon built a new bedroom onto the house, larger and brighter than the small room Georgia had been using. He installed a large window that looked out over the mountains, knowing how much she loved the view. He carved a headboard for their bed, decorating it with intricate patterns that spoke of the hours of love and care he had put into the work. In April, when the snow had melted and the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the valley, they rode into Winnemucca to be married. Georgia's sister Martha had made the journey from San Francisco with her husband and children, and they served as witnesses. The ceremony was held in the small church on Main Street, presided over by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. Georgia had never felt more beautiful than she did standing beside Gideon in her homemade dress, the silver locket gleaming at her throat. His eyes shone with love as he spoke his vows, his voice strong and sure. When he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, she felt tears of joy stream down her face. "I promise to love you and protect you for all of my days," Gideon said. "To stand beside you in good times and bad, to be your partner and your friend, to build a life with you that honors the grace we were both given that day in the snow. You are my heart, Georgia, and I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of your love." "You have already proven that," Georgia said through her tears. "Every single day, you show me what it means to be cherished and valued and loved. I promise to be the wife you deserve, to work beside you and support you and love you with everything I have. You saved my life, Gideon, and now I give that life to you freely and gladly." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the small congregation erupted in applause. After the ceremony, there was a modest celebration at the hotel restaurant, with food and music and laughter. Martha pulled Georgia aside during a quiet moment, tears in her own eyes. "I am so happy for you," she said. "When I got your letter explaining everything that had happened, I was terrified. I thought I had lost you. But seeing you now, seeing how happy you are, I know that everything worked out exactly as it was meant to." "It did," Georgia agreed. "I found my home, Martha. I found where I belong." That night, Gideon and Georgia returned to the ranch as husband and wife. They stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. Gideon wrapped his arms around Georgia from behind, and she leaned back against him, feeling utterly content. "You have any regrets?" he asked softly. "About the life you could have had in San Francisco?" Georgia turned in his arms to face him. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to have. You are the man I was meant to love. Everything that happened, as terrible as it was, led me here to you. I would not change any of it. I love you, Mrs. Ortiz," Gideon said, and the pride in his voice made her heart swell. "I love you too, Mr. Ortiz," Georgia replied, "now and always." The years that followed were full and rich. Gideon and Georgia built the Double O Ranch into one of the most successful operations in northern Nevada. They used the reward money wisely, investing in quality breeding stock and improving their land. They worked from sunup to sundown during the busy seasons, but they always made time for each other, for quiet evenings by the fire and Sunday rides through the mountains. 2 years after their wedding, Georgia gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Gabriel, and he brought joy and chaos into their ordered life. Gideon proved to be a doting father, often carrying the baby with him as he did his chores, talking to his son about the ranch and the cattle and the mountains. 3 years after Gabriel came another son, whom they named Grant. And 2 years after that, their family was completed with the birth of a daughter they named Grace, after the mercy that had brought her parents together on that snowy day so many years before. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with the chores as soon as they were able. Georgia homeschooled them, teaching them to read and write and do arithmetic at the big kitchen table. Gideon taught them about ranching and animal husbandry and the importance of hard work and integrity. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Gideon and Georgia acquired more land, expanding their operation and their herd. They built a proper barn and a bunkhouse for the seasonal workers they hired during Roundup. They planted orchards and gardens, making the ranch as self-sufficient as possible. But no matter how busy they became, no matter how many responsibilities they took on, Gideon and Georgia always made time for each other. Every year on their anniversary, Gideon would recreate their first Christmas together, hanging popcorn strings on a tree and giving Georgia a gift that spoke of his deep love for her. And every year, Georgia would touch the silver locket she still wore around her neck and remember the day a cowboy had offered her grace instead of judgment, mercy instead of condemnation. One evening, when the children were grown and starting families of their own, Gideon and Georgia sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Gideon's hair was gray now, and Georgia's face bore the lines of a life well lived, but their love had only deepened with time. "Do you remember the day we met?" Georgia asked, though she knew the answer. They had told the story so many times to their children and grandchildren that it had become family legend. "Every detail," Gideon said. "I remember the snow falling and the sound of gunshots and the way you looked when you turned around and saw me. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen, facing down death with such courage." "I was terrified," Georgia admitted. "I was sure I was going to die in that clearing." "But you did not," Gideon said. "You lived, you fought, you survived. And you gave me the greatest gift of my life when you agreed to share that life with me." Georgia took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "We gave each other that gift," she said. "We built something beautiful together, something that will last long after we are gone." She looked out at the ranch spread before them, at the cattle grazing in the distance, and the children's homes visible on the horizon where Gideon had deeded them land to build their own futures. She thought about Gabriel and his wife and their 4 children, about Grant and his family, about Grace and her new husband who was learning the ranching trade from Gideon. "We did all right, did we not?" she said softly. "We did better than all right," Gideon replied. "We did magnificently." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, the two of them sitting in comfortable silence as the sun slipped below the mountains. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Georgia thought back to that terrifying day in the snow, to the moment when she had been certain her life was over. She thought about the stranger who had appeared out of the storm, the man who had seen someone in need and had chosen to help rather than look away. That single act of grace had changed everything, had given her not just life but a life worth living. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of it against her skin. Inside was still that photograph of the ranch house, faded now with age but still precious. It reminded her of where she had come from and what she had built. It reminded her of the power of mercy and the strength of love. "Thank you," she whispered to Gideon. "For what?" he asked. "For saving me," she said. "For loving me. For building this life with me. For every day of the past 35 years. For everything." Gideon kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who did not know what he was missing until you came into his life. Thank you for being my partner and my love and the mother of my children. Thank you for choosing me." "Always," Georgia said. "From that day in the snow until my last breath, I will always choose you." They sat together as the night deepened, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built a love that would endure for all time. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what could be accomplished when two people worked together toward a common goal. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the cattle shifted and settled for the night. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and sage, and overhead, the stars wheeled slowly across the vast Nevada sky. Inside the house, a fire burned low in the hearth, waiting for them to come in and bank it for the night. But Gideon and Georgia were in no hurry. They had learned long ago to savor these moments of peace and connection, to hold them close and treasure them. Life could change in an instant, as they both knew well. The difference between death and life, between despair and hope, could come down to a single choice, a single moment of grace offered and accepted. "I wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that day," Georgia mused. "If you had been 5 minutes later, or if you had decided not to follow the sound of the gunshots." "But I was there," Gideon said firmly, "and I did follow them. There is no point in wondering about what might have been when what is has been so good." Georgia smiled. Even after all these years, Gideon could still make her feel cherished and safe with just a few simple words. "You are right," she said. "What is has been very good indeed." They went inside eventually, banking the fire and preparing for bed with the easy familiarity of a long marriage. As they lay together in the darkness, Georgia thought about all the people in the world who were searching for what she had found. A love that was steady and true, a partner who saw them for who they truly were and loved them anyway, a home that was built on mutual respect and shared dreams. She had been given all of that and more, and it had started with a moment of grace on a snowy day in the mountains. She had been begging for mercy, and a cowboy had offered her something better. He had offered her a future, a chance to become more than just another victim of violence and circumstance. He had seen her potential and had given her the space and support to realize it. In the morning, she would wake beside him, and they would start another day on the ranch they had built together. There would be work to do and challenges to face, as there always were. But they would face them together, as they had faced everything for the past 35 years. The snow was falling again outside their window, soft and gentle, covering the world in white. But inside their home, there was only warmth and love and the quiet contentment of two people who had found exactly what they were meant to find in each other. Georgia closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that when she woke, Gideon would be there beside her. He always was. He always would be. That was the promise they had made to each other all those years ago, and it was a promise they had kept every single day since. Years continued to pass, and the ranch thrived under their stewardship. Gideon taught his sons and sons-in-law everything he knew about ranching, about reading the land and the weather, about breeding strong cattle and managing resources wisely. Georgia taught her daughter and daughters-in-law about running a household on the frontier, about preserving food and making medicines from wild plants, about raising children to be strong and compassionate. The Double O Ranch became known throughout northern Nevada as a place of integrity and quality. When Gideon gave his word on a deal, everyone knew it was as good as gold. When Georgia invited someone into her home, they knew they would be treated with warmth and generosity. The Ortiz family had built a reputation that extended far beyond their property lines. But for all their success and all their prosperity, the thing that mattered most to both of them remained unchanged: their love for each other. In the quiet moments between the demands of the ranch and the needs of their growing family, Gideon and Georgia found each other again and again, their connection as strong as it had been on that first Christmas Eve when they had confessed their feelings. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of laughter and noise, with children running through the rooms and adults catching up on news and gossip. A long table was set up outside under the cottonwood trees, laden with food and drink. Gabriel stood to make a toast, raising his glass high. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "To two people who showed us what it means to build a life together, to face hardships with courage and celebrate victories with humility. You taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice we make every single day. You taught us that family is everything and that home is not a place, but the people we share it with. Thank you for the example you set and the legacy you are creating. May you have many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses and drank to the toast. Gideon pulled Georgia close and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and catcalls of their grandchildren. Georgia laughed, her face flushed with happiness and embarrassment. As the party continued around them, Gideon led Georgia away from the crowd, back to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the mountains stood dark against the horizon. 40 years, Gideon said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever." "Both are true," Georgia said. "Every day with you feels new, but I also cannot imagine a time when you were not in my life. You are as much a part of me as my own heartbeat." Gideon took something from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "I got you something," he said. Georgia opened her hand to find a small wooden carving, smooth and beautiful. It took her a moment to realize what it was. Two horses standing close together, their heads touching. The detail was exquisite, every line and curve rendered with obvious love and care. "You made this?" she asked, awed. "I have been working on it for months," Gideon admitted. "I wanted to give you something that represented us, two separate beings who chose to journey through life together. Two individuals who became stronger as a pair than they ever could have been alone." Tears streamed down Georgia's face as she clutched the carving to her chest. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect. This life we have built is perfect." "Not perfect," Gideon corrected gently, "but real and honest and full of love. That is better than perfect." They stood together watching the sunset, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created. Their children and grandchildren laughed and played in the yard. The cattle they had bred and raised grazed in the fields. The house they had built and expanded stood solid and welcoming at their backs. Everything they had, everything they were, had grown from that moment of grace in the snow 40 years ago. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Georgia thought about the girl she had been then, desperate and afraid, certain that her life was over. She thought about the man who had saved her, who had looked past his own safety to do what was right. And she thought about everything that had come after, the love and the work, the children and the challenges, the triumphs and the sorrows that made up a full life. "I would do it all again," she said suddenly. "Every moment, every hardship, every fear. I would do it all again to end up right here with you." "So would I," Gideon said, 1,000 times over." The party continued late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. The grandchildren begged to hear the story of how their grandparents met, and Gideon and Georgia told it once more, their voices interweaving as they painted the picture of that snowy day so long ago. The children listened with rapt attention, as they always did, even though they had heard the story many times before. There was something magical about it, something that spoke to the power of courage and compassion, and choosing to do the right thing even when it was difficult. When the story was finished, little Grace, the youngest grandchild named after her grandmother and the mercy that had saved her, climbed into Georgia's lap. "Grandma," she said seriously, "was you very scared?" "I was terrified," Georgia admitted. "I thought I was going to die." "But Grandpa saved you," the little girl said. "He did," Georgia agreed. "He offered me grace when I was begging for mercy. He gave me a chance to live and to build a life beyond my wildest dreams." "And then you fell in love," the girl said, clearly delighted by this part of the story. "And then we fell in love," Georgia confirmed, meeting Gideon's eyes across the porch. "The best kind of love built on respect and trust and shared dreams." Eventually, the guests began to leave, heading to their own homes on the property or starting the journey back to town. Gabriel and his brothers helped clean up, their wives shooing Georgia away when she tried to help, insisting that this was her day to rest and be celebrated. Finally, the house was quiet again, the last guest gone, the last dish washed and put away. Gideon and Georgia stood in their bedroom, the one he had built for her all those years ago, preparing for bed. "It was a wonderful day," Georgia said, removing the locket she never took off and placing it carefully on the dresser. "Everything I could have hoped for." "You deserve wonderful days," Gideon said. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Georgia turned to face him, this man she had loved for 40 years, this man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same kindness and strength they had held on that snowy day in the clearing. "I have all the happiness in the world," she said. "I have you." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had built something rare and precious together. Outside, the Nevada night was vast and star-filled, the mountains standing watch over the valley. Inside, there was only warmth and love and the deep peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged with exactly who you were meant to be with. Time moved forward as it always does. Seasons changed, years passed, and life continued its steady march. But the love between Gideon and Georgia remained constant, a north star they navigated by, a foundation they built upon, a gift they treasured above all else. When they were in their 60s, Gideon's mother passed away peacefully in Sacramento, and they made the journey to say goodbye. When they were in their 70s, they celebrated the birth of their first great-grandchild, a moment of joy that reminded them of the continuity of family and the lasting impact of the choices they had made. Through it all, through the joys and the sorrows, the celebrations and the losses, Gideon and Georgia faced everything together. They had learned long ago that life was unpredictable, that nothing was guaranteed except the love they had for each other. So they held that love close and let it guide them through whatever came their way. On a crisp autumn day when Georgia was 78 years old, she stood in the kitchen of their home, preparing dinner as she had done thousands of times before. Through the window, she could see Gideon working in the barn with their grandson, teaching him how to repair a saddle. Her heart swelled with love and pride at the sight. This was the life that had grown from a moment of grace. This was the legacy they were leaving. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but an example of what it meant to love deeply and live fully, to face adversity with courage and to treat others with compassion. She thought back to that terrified girl in the snow, begging for her life, certain that her story was ending. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming. The love and the joy, the children and the grandchildren, the thousands of sunsets watched from a front porch with a man who cherished her, the life of purpose and meaning she would build. But that girl could not have believed it even if she had been told. Some things had to be experienced to be understood. Some gifts were too precious to be described with mere words. Gideon came in from the barn, his step a little slower than it used to be, but his smile just as warm. He wrapped his arms around Georgia from behind, just as he had done countless times over the years, and kissed the top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Georgia said. "About how one moment of grace changed everything. About how grateful I am that you were there that day, that you chose to help a stranger, that you offered me a future when I thought I had none." "Best decision I ever made," Gideon said. "You gave me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us." They stood together in the kitchen of their home. Two old people who had loved each other for more than half a century, who had built a life of meaning and impact, who had proven that one act of courage could change the course of history, at least the history of two lives that had intersected on a snowy day in the mountains. As the sun set on another day at the Double O Ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Gideon and Georgia moved through their evening routine with the ease of long practice. They ate dinner together at the table they had shared for decades. They cleaned up side by side, their movements synchronized after so many years. They sat by the fire, his hand in hers, and talked about their day, their family, their dreams for the future. And when they finally went to bed, Georgia touched the locket on the dresser, the one she had worn for so many years, the one that held the photograph of their home. Tomorrow she would put it back on, as she did every day. Tomorrow she would wake beside Gideon, and they would face another day together, as they had done for more than 50 years. But tonight, in this moment, she simply felt grateful. Grateful for the cowboy who had offered grace instead of turning away. Grateful for the love they had built together. Grateful for every day, every challenge, every joy they had shared. The snow had fallen as she begged for mercy, but a cowboy had offered grace instead. And from that, grace had grown a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion and the strength of two hearts that chose each other and never looked back. That was their story, the story they had lived and would continue living until their last breaths. It was a story of survival and courage, of love and commitment, of building something beautiful out of the ashes of fear. It was their story, and it was perfect not because it was easy or simple, but because it was real and honest and full of the kind of love that endures all things. And as Georgia drifted off to sleep beside the man she loved, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of that same enduring love, another day of grace given and received, another day of the life they had chosen to build together. That was all anyone could ask for, and it was more than enough.